absolute value equations, you have to think about the fact that you're talking about distance away. So if you want the absolute value of 6, that equals 6. The absolute value of negative 6 also equals 6. So if I were to put this in variable form, if I were to say, well, the absolute value of x equals 6, then there's two things that x could equal. X could equal 6 and x could equal negative 6, because what's inside could be the positive or negative. They are both 6 away from 0, right? And so with equations, when you have an absolute value equations, you actually have to do two equations, all right? So if you have something like this, this is actually saying that what is inside could equal 11, but what is inside could also equal negative 11. And that would still be true, right? So if the inside of that equals 11, then the absolute value is 11. And if the inside equals negative 11, the absolute value is still 11. And so anytime you have an absolute value equation, you have to first make sure the absolute value is all by itself, which this one is, and then you set up two equations. You say what is inside 2x plus 5 could equal 11, and what is inside 2x plus 5 could equal negative 11. And then you solve these two separate equations, and you will have two answers that will make this true. You should know how to solve it. We will subtract our 5. We get 2x equals 6, and then we would divide by 2, x equals 3. That's one of our answers. We do exactly the same thing on the other side. We subtract our 5. We get 2x equals negative 16. Then we divide by 2. X equals negative 8. All right? So this has two answers that make this true. If I were to plug in a 3, I would get 2 times 3 plus 5. 6 plus 5 is 11. If I were to plug in a negative 8, I would get 2 times negative 8. Negative 16 plus 5 equals negative 11. Both of those absolute values are 11. Make sure it's by itself. Write two different equations, solve two different equations. All right, so let's look at this example. The first step is to make sure it's by itself. So you can see that the absolute value here is not by itself. We have something out there. And so when it says make sure the absolute value is by itself, it means get rid of anything that's not in there. We also have stuff inside here that would be more simple to write, right? I have multiple terms here that you could combine. So the 4 stays by itself, but 2y's minus 5y's, we have negative 3y in there. And so you want to simplify the inside, and you also want to make sure that that absolute value is all by itself. So before I even start with two equations, I am going to subtract that 5 over. And so when I subtract the 5 over, 21 minus 5 gives me 16. Now I've done the first thing. I've simplified everything and made sure the absolute value is by itself. That means what is inside here could equal 16, and that would be true. And what is inside here could equal negative 16. Both of those would make that a true statement, right? The absolute value of 16 is 16. The absolute value of negative 16 is 16. So I take the inside of the absolute value and I just set it to the positive and negative. And then I just solve. So I would subtract my 4. I would get negative 3y equals 12. I would divide by negative 3. I would get y equals negative 4. Do the same thing over here. I would subtract my 4. I get negative 3y equals negative 20. I would divide by negative 3. I would get that y also equals 20 over 3 because that doesn't reduce. So for these, you're always going to get two answers, always. You're going to get the absolute value by itself and then take the inside and set up two equations, one positive, one negative, all right? So I want you to try a couple of these.